Hello and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. We are really happy you're joining us today for our webinar. We'll talk about the functional assessment analysis module. Our hosts today are myself, Niels. I'm product manager for life science at Qualysys, and I'm really glad that I'm joined by Steffen. You can see him on the video there already. Who is joining us from Australia because he's currently working at the University of Queensland, but his original home is Cologne, where he's a research associate. So yeah, thank you for joining us, Steffen. And I'm also glad that Libor is with us, who will support us on the chat and answer your questions. If you want to ask any questions or if you have any trouble with the sound, you can use this small orange icon to extend the control panel and then change your sound settings here. And most importantly, you can use the questions panel at the bottom right if you want to ask any questions. The questions will be only visible to us, but you will either get a personal answer or we will try to answer questions that are relevant to everyone in the questions panel for everyone. So we'll repeat your question and answer there. And some of the questions we'll also be able to answer at the end of the webinar. We are aiming for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a few extra minutes for questions depending on time. So a little bit about the background about this module. The functional assessment module has been discussed at Qualysys for many years, and we are really grateful for all the input that we received from partners at Liverpool John Moores University, CAR Barcelona, Manchester Institute of Health and Performance, and University of Salford, Rich Jones, Texas Health, Craig Garrison, and many others that I did not list here. So it's always great to hear all the input from you. But over the last 2 or 3 years, we've worked more intensively with IFD Cologne and Steffen in particular to really turn all these ideas into a product. So in 2019, we defined the movement tasks and built a report, which is now in sort of first use at some facilities and just being rolled out now. Before I move on, I would like to ask Steffen to give a few examples of how you see from a practical point of view where this module can be used.
Yeah, first of all, hello everybody all over the world. Here in Australia it's now 10 p.m. so it's a little bit late. When we started the development, what we wanted to achieve was that we get a very time efficient way to generate information on how someone is moving. And that someone could be an elite athlete, could be someone who's just doing sports recreationally, or basically any other person ranging from kid to very old people, and people that are suffering from movement-related pain. So an elite athlete could be, for example, a football player that needs to be screened for risk of sustaining injuries because football players earn a lot of money and need to be protected from injuries. Or you could have an elite athlete that is rehabilitating from an injury. So you want to make sure that you do everything that rehabilitation process is successful and fast. A recreational sportsman would maybe just want to be analyzed because he or she has problems when doing sports, and probably the underlying reasons are difficult to find, and therefore the functional assessment task tries to help the medical team, that includes the medical doctor or maybe a physiotherapist, to find these movement-related problems. So it is a tool to add in that process. But also everyday people that don't do any sports might suffer from movement-related pain, maybe during walking or during stair climbing, or might have some health condition where it is on a question whether they should undergo surgery or not. And here also the functional assessment module can help to gain an understanding where movement-related problems are coming from and how to ideally treat them. Maybe also with a technological intervention, like with an insole, or with physiotherapy treatment. So with the functional assessment tool, you have a toolkit that allows you to define a set of tasks with which you want to analyze the person. And from these tasks, you can derive certain relevant parameters or metrics, and you can look at waveforms, and you can make that decision based on the problem that the person has. So basically, after an initial assessment, you figure out the best set of tasks and the variables that you want to address, and then you can perform the analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen. Yeah, I think you raised a very important point there about giving input in the process of understanding a movement problem. And that's also an important disclaimer that I want to highlight at this point. This tool provides information about movement. It can help to understand how a person moves, but it's not a diagnostic tool at this point. It requires experience and it requires good understanding of the general movement. And then this can be one piece of the puzzle for a physician who is trying to understand a movement problem. But we're not offering a tool here that where you can perform a test and get some sort of diagnosis out of it. So it's not a medical device. So that's important to mention here. And sorry, Steffen, I was a bit early there. Research, of course, is one more area. Do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, sure. So if you have that tool, it is a cool way to get data from different kinds of movement in a fast way, where you can also have a nice tool that you can visualize the data fast. And we'll later see the web report, which is quite intuitive. So it's probably not only for research, but maybe also for teaching quite nice, because you have a very elegant way of showing the results to maybe not only patients, but maybe also students. So it could be interesting for both research and teaching as well.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for interrupting there. So this is the background for the module. But I also want to explain a little bit what we mean by analysis module. So we're talking about the functional assessment analysis module. And some of you have worked with our modules before, but maybe others haven't. So what we mean by module is that we provide a tool to get from motion capture data to label data to segment data to report in a very efficient way. And that's really the purpose of our modules. They are sort of add-ons that you can add to our QDM software, and they include everything that you need to get through this process. They are using Visual 3D primarily as processing engine. So all the biomechanical calculations are done in sort of validated ways or transparent ways, and you can open up the CMO workspace afterwards to review anything that's been calculated. So it's not a black box. And we've got these modules available for gait, running, baseball, golf, cycling, equine, and now also for functional assessment. There are some requirements that you need when you're working with the system. We recommend a system with 10 to 12 cameras, but you can use less also depending on the movements that you record. So you will see in a minute that there are a lot of different movements. You also require force plates because this analysis really relies on measuring the loads on especially the lower body when during the contact phases. So force plates are required and 2 separate. So you have 1 for each foot. You can optionally also add EMG. So the reports are prepared to display EMG data as well. And of course, you need our QDM software, Visual 3D, and the module itself. If you don't have a license for it, contact us. We're happy to provide trial licenses, of course, so that you can try it. The way the workflow works is you first collect data in QDM. You pick the tasks from the list that you want to measure. Note that you must include the static session here. And then you process each of these different sessions. So you're very flexible of how you combine the different movements. And then you review each report in Visual 3D. And finally, you are then able to make one single online report of all the data. The available tasks, you can see here, it's quite a big list. We've got around 11 or 12 different tasks at the moment. Acceleration is simply accelerating as much as possible on the force plates. Change of direction is a side step and then changing directions. Counter movement jump, that's one we will look at in a little bit more detail later on, is also performed on the force plates with 1 foot on each plate. Cutting maneuvers can be performed at different angles. Drop jumps, either bilateral or with a single leg, to really get the load during the impact, and also look at the strategy that the person might have when impacting. Simple gait, looking at gait analysis, again with force plates, also running, so some more sort of standard activities. Side hops, where that's actually one of the more challenging ones from my experience, where the athlete or the patient is jumping on one leg, and switching between the two force plates. Then single leg jump, which is jump where the person jumps as far as possible, and single leg landing, where the focus is on balance after the landing. And finally, tapping, which is the most exhausting one, where the person is performing quick tapping on each force plate for, I think, 20 seconds, if I remember right. So that is more about frequency. And okay, so in terms of reports, then the outputs are Visual 2D reports and web reports. And one thing I want to highlight here is all the reports are showing the contact phase only, because this is really, this whole module is about looking at loads, looking at strategies of the body, how to act when there is heavy load on the body. So even for something like gait or running, we're not showing the traditional gait cycle, but we are actually showing the contact phase here to focus on that. So now I'll show a brief example. So if we switch over to our QDM software, this is what it normally looks like, and many of you are probably using it like that. There's simply a red button to make recordings and so on. But if you have one of our modules installed, you can view the project pane. And in the project data tree, you can see all the sessions that we've collected so far, and you can also create new sessions. Now, yeah, for obvious reasons, we can't do any live data collection today, but I'll add a session here and import some files. So I can add a person, say ID 200, will be myself. I'll enter height and weight. Then move on to create a session for today. I'll be using marker based data, and we also have an option to have pure video analysis. And okay, now we get to the point where we have a lot of flexibility. So here you can see all the tasks that I've shown before, and you can select yourself for a given session what you would like to, what type of movement you would like to look at. But one thing that is mandatory for all is to start off with a static session. So I'll add the static sub-session type here and import a file. So I'll import a static trial, and I'll also import a functional trial. Import file functional. The marker set that we are using is shown if you click on the show guide button here. It's a relatively simple marker set that we call the sports marker set, which is really aimed for sort of hands-on analysis in a setting where you need to have a certain throughput, and you rather don't want to put too many markers on the body. But there is an alternative option to use a more sort of scientific or sophisticated marker set that is also supported here, which is using sort of 4 marker tracking clusters per segment, and also using medial markers. But having said that, we think this is a good starting point here, rather than having no data. Having this marker set, is the sports marker set, is a very good compromise. And if you want to have more, even higher fidelity, you can use the other marker set, where the documentation is also included. And as you can see, we have no medial knee marker, and this is the reason for the functional trial that we've also recorded. So I will process these now. So we've got Visual 2D running right now. Sorry, you can't see much of that. It showed up on another screen, but I'll drag it across as soon as it's finished. And what we do in this trial is, based on the functional trial, we have determined the position of all the limbs, also the position of the knee axis from the functional trial, where the person is performing some small knee bends or small mild squats. So the next step will be to add one of the movements here, and I'll simply use the acceleration session for this example. Import file rather than recording. I'll import 2 files and start processing again. And the order in which you do the processing is, of course, up to you. So there's no need to do the static trial before recording more trials. You can record everything at once, and then you will do the actual processing afterwards. But you just have to remember to include the static trial. Otherwise, there will be a message telling you that the static trial is missing. So this is the Visual2D report, which is for us mostly a quality assurance tool. Some of our customers also quite like to use it, but if you want to have all the results in one place, we recommend the online web report. So I'll create that by clicking online report here. So now all the data is combined. If there is video, it's also uploaded. I'll get a message here in my web browser asking me to claim this report, because the online reports are on our report platform, which obviously requires me to log in. The login is the same as for our client login if you're downloading the QDM software. And I can now say this, I will claim this report as myself, and only I will be able to view this report. So this is an example here for the data that I've just uploaded. To save some time, I've prepared another report. So when you head over to reports, you can see all the reports I've uploaded, and you can see here another one with 27 trials, which includes all the different movements. So I'll open up that one, and that gives us the possibility to look at different movements here. For that part, I'll start by showing you some general features of the reports, and then I'll hand over to Steffen for some words on interpretation. So if you haven't seen the reports before, they are an interactive tool to better understand your data. You are able to switch between mean curves or consistency, where consistency shows you all individual trials. So in this case, we actually only have 2. They are very close together. But if I go to something like maybe change of direction, you can see that we probably have some more variety here. I don't know, or cutting, let's say cutting, we've got some more variety in the data here. If I go to consistency, I can see every single trial. There's also information available as a 3D viewer. So if I play back one of the movements, you can see the movement in the 3D viewer. You can see any associated videos. It's possible to expand videos and graphs to really have an in-depth look at the data. And one useful thing is also this pointer here that is showing me in every single curve. It's showing me the current frame position so that it's easier to understand the data. It's also possible to add annotations. So if I maybe go back to the mean mode and note any thing that I want to point out, I can say plus here and say that slide left, right difference. I can add a note here that will be saved with the report and that I can share later. That's also available. And finally, when I'm done with this process, there are some options for sharing. So either I can go back to the report center and create a secure link to share with someone else, similar to what you know from like sharing files with Dropbox, for example. And it's in a similar way to that. It's creating a link that no one can guess. But it's also possible to use the export pane and to generate a PDF here that I can simply download, and then I can print it or send it to a person. So you see right now it's still being generated, but after 20 or 30 seconds, you can see that. Rather than waiting for that, I'll hand over to Steffen to take a closer look at the data from this session.
Yeah, so basically what you've seen here briefly is that you have a really nice tool to play like a little bit like a detective and analyze different motions. So probably start with going to the counter movement jump section, and we have a quite elite athlete here that is probably worth millions of money for his club. But if you look at how he's performing that counter movement jump, probably we start by looking at the ground reaction forces. And therefore, you've seen that you have a pane there for kinematics, but you have also kinetics. And if you scroll down way to the bottom, I think then we come to the ground reaction forces. And you always see that the red curve is the left leg and the blue curve is the right leg. And if we then look at the vertical ground reaction force at the start, for example, then you can see that, and we make that bigger, then you can see that during the push-off or during the late push-off, and also in particular during the landing, there is less force on the left leg. So there's apparently an asymmetry, and our athlete seems to avoid loading on the left leg. So this is just the broad image that we have, and this is derived from looking at variables. But what we could also do is to get a little bit more evidence or put things in numbers, is to go to the metrics pane. That's something that Niels haven't shown us before. And here you have, for example, the peak ground reaction force, and you could compare that. Or what you also see in the top one is the jump height as a performance measure. So you could also see if the performance of the athlete has changed. So you have variables that you can see as functions, as curves, and you have discrete metrics that you can take a look at to get your results. The next thing that you could do is, for example, look at the joint level, and maybe we go to a lower body kinematics, therefore. Because we might think that we want to screen this athlete, like I said before, for his ACL rupture risk. So we might go to the knee joint, so a little bit down, and you see that for each joint, the motions are displayed in the 3 planes of motion. So on the left is the sagittal plane, in the middle is the frontal plane, and on the right side is the transverse plane. And negative is abduction. So you can see that maybe as a compensation mechanism, the blue curve has higher abduction angles. I would not say that it is necessarily excessive, so probably you're not at the highest risk, Niels, but probably due to the asymmetry and the load avoidance, you see a compensation, and probably that's why your right leg is a little bit at higher risk, but probably not at very high risk. So don't have to worry, your career can move on. So that would be an example from analyzing the counter movement jump, and I really like the feature that you can take a look at the push off, because that might be more performance relevant, but you could also look at the landing, and because that is where the risk is coming into play a little bit more. Maybe go to another example in another movement. Consider we have our patient that has undergone or had the bad luck that he or she had a ACL rupture and needed to undergo surgery. And then afterwards, maybe after 6 or 8 or 10 months, we perform an assessment. And one task that we normally do in Cologne there is the single leg landing task, which is a very common task also in the clinical world. But here we have the full potential to analyze 3D kinematics and kinetics at all joints. So one thing that you would look at is also asymmetry, and you want to look if, for example, knee flexion is avoided, if high knee extension moments are avoided. So if loading the previously injured or the structure that underwent surgery is loaded like the other leg, or if it is not loaded. And we see there pretty nice relationships with the success of the healing process, which is also underpinned by some literature in the field, that you see load redistributions. So patients that are not really successful in their rehabilitation still after a few months do not load the knee joint of the affected side, but tend to load more the ankle and the hip joint, which might lead to poorer stability. That would be the example for that. For example, if you look at the knee extensor moment, if you scroll down a bit, Neil, sorry, then you could compare, and probably you go to, yeah, I think that is example here, which has some issues at the moment. Yeah, but it
because
doesn't
this
matter.
is
So
the
basically,
right landing. Yeah, this is the right landing. This is the left landing.
Yeah, so you see, I think you can see the blue curve. So basically, you would look at the peak moment here and maybe the average moment. So there you see it better. You see yeah, there you can see the comparison. So the left leg would have avoidance in the loading, in particular in the early landing phase, which is critical. So even though Niels never had an ACL surgery, I guess, he shows a similar pattern that you would expect. So that is something that we critically look at when we do our analyses. And the nice thing about this tool is that it's not only showing you the curves, so the pure numbers, but you also have the synchronized video and the skeleton animation. So you can add your qualitative inspection of the motion in that sense. So you always have the best thing out of two worlds. You have the qualitative video picture, and you can get some information that you can just draw from the video, which are not captured in numbers, and you can relate this to the precise 3D kinematics and kinetics that you collect with the tool. So I think we also like that figure. Yeah, and here you can see a lot of the athleticism of that person. It was really nice to have him for that analysis. Cost us a little bit of money.
Yes, absolutely.
And probably a last example, which not only shows that we analyze athletes with that tool, is that you have features like gait or running, where you could also analyze slow jogging, and you get all the relevant information here. So you might, for example, like I said before, look at the knee valgus moment and see if there are asymmetries or if the values are too high. I guess all the values here in the tool are getting normalized to body mass, all the kinetic parameters, which is good because then you can have a quick comparison to values published in the literature and estimate if the numbers are in the normal range or if potentially they are too high. So you could imagine having your osteoarthritis patient here, or probably a patient that has undergone knee replacement surgery, and you want to make sure that the gait pattern is normal and symmetric after that surgery, because otherwise the non-affected leg will be the next that needs to be replaced. So I think that is a nice feature that helps improve the rehabilitation process and bring quantitative information into it. Because one really cool feature of that report, which haven't been shown here and probably don't have really good data to show that, but you can compare results from different measurement times directly against each other. So you can add data and then add data from a previous report and then directly plot the results against each other. So probably don't show that here now. Maybe there's another report that we can load. And that is a very important feature. I think every one of you that has to deal with patients at several points in time and wants to compare results knows that it can be a tricky task to perform, and the technical solutions for that are probably not the best at the moment. And we really wanted to find a way to allow direct comparisons between time points in order to see if there's improvements in certain parameters, if asymmetries disappear, or if they are disappearing only at certain points in time. Maybe, for example, during a landing phase, maybe at the beginning of the landing, asymmetries are still there, but at the end of the landing, they already become better. And I think with that web report, you have a really nice tool to perform these comparisons. So you can be in a very time efficient way, you can get lots of information from your patient or from the people that you want to analyze, and spend more time with really analyzing the data, or that spend less time with performing the actual analysis and spend more time with interpreting the results and finding and thinking about solutions for a certain problem, instead of spending a lot of time with the actual processing and the report generation, and then having only little time for the interpretation and actually extracting useful information for your patient or for the athlete that you're working with. I think that is a very nice part, and probably the nicest one of that functional assessment tool. Yeah, I think those were the examples.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Steffen. Yeah, of course, Steffen was joking about the performance of the subject here because it was me. But it's still very interesting to see this, even though this was just test data. But to see some asymmetries for myself, I can say it's interesting to think about that and to relate that to my own experience. So that's very nice. So to wrap up, I'll quickly switch over here, and you'll find this handout after the presentation in the resources section. So there's some information about the reports here, and with this we already get to our summary, and we want to wrap up by saying the module offers you a single module for many possibilities. It's one workflow from data collection to final report. You can back up any recommendations or observations that you may have with objective data. We'll make some resources for you available so that you can take a closer look afterwards, and also the recording of this session, of course. I saw there were many questions on the panel here. Many of them are answered by Libor already, but I will go through them and answer some of them right now after the session here in live. And maybe there's some parts where Steffen can also help me out. If you would like a trial license, please contact your Qualys representative, contact sales@qualys.com, and you also have Helen's contact details, who will, of course, forward any relevant questions to myself or Steffen or Libor. With that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Please stay because I will be answering questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And I would also like to point out that we have another webinar next week using Unity with skeleton data. And just go to qualys.com webinars and sign up for that. But yeah, with that, thank you for now. And I'll take a quick look at the questions here and see what Libor highlighted for me to answer. So there was one question, is it possible to get a template of the online report to make a custom functional assessment report? Yeah, that's a very good question. As of now, we don't have that flexibility yet. We'll be working on making the web report more flexible so that variables can be turned on and off and parameters can be turned on and off. And of course, we would really like to go further in that direction. But because the reports are done in Visual 3D, you have all the flexibility of Visual 3D if you want to use the module for your own research, for example, to get raw data or to tweak and add your own parameters. And all the parameters are available in Visual 3D as well. And we're also very interested to hear your feedback and what movements you're interested in. So if there are certain tasks or certain movements that you can cite or that you can tell us about where you have reference papers, then we are really happy to discuss if we can include them, because we really see this as a starting point, and it will be a growing list, we are sure, of tasks. So I hope that answered this question. Then there was a question, maybe Steffen, I'll need your help with that one, about reference papers or published papers about functional assessment, especially for ACL. I think this is something that we should share as part of the resources after the webinar about the general relationship. And perhaps it's worth pointing out that there is no published work using this exact marker set that I showed today, but the module supports the more sophisticated marker set, which has been used in Cologne for many years, where there is published data. Anything you would like to add, Steffen, on that topic?
Yeah, and probably could add there's some good review articles on biomechanical risk factors for ACL ruptures, and probably we could add links to these papers that you could access them and read through them. I think there are certain movements that have been established in the literature, even though there's not a definite set of tasks that is done now, but I think with the assessment tool you can cover the most common ones, and then you can also read up about the actual science behind it and look at the evidence from that. I think we could provide references for that to some of the most important works. No problem.
Yeah, we'll make sure we include that in the summary and on the page, and we'll send that email out tomorrow. There was another question about EMG, and I didn't have any EMG included in this report, but I saw that the comparison report that I used did have EMG included, and I'll just quickly bring up what this looks like. Perhaps I'll go for gate as its session type, and then move down to the EMG section. You can see that the EMG analysis is relatively basic. So you simply see an averaged signal over multiple trials that you can show, you can display. You can also look at the consistency to see every single trial, and you can review the raw data to check the quality of the data. But other than that, it's a fairly subjective part analyzing or this EMG signal. So it's up to you to decide which muscles you would like to include, and then you name the muscles accordingly in the software when collecting data, and it will be time normalized and it will appear in the report together with the other data. But as of now, we have no more sophisticated EMG variables. Maybe one more question where, Steffen, you can help out. What is the % difference between legs to be considered asymmetric? And I'm quite sure there's no simple answer here, but I'm still interested in what you say.
Yeah, that is almost, could be a philosophical answer. I think that is really tricky to do. We need to keep in mind that a certain amount of asymmetry is probably not problematic for a person. There's probably also a little bit of asymmetry that might come through the measurements that we take, because there's, as in any measurement, a certain measurement error. And it also depends on the variable. So as a rule of thumb, I would say any difference that is bigger than 5 to 10% is probably something that you take a look at. And probably also should take a look at if it is consistent in the several variables, because we know we are looking at the entire lower extremity and the joints are not independent from each other. So if you see asymmetries in several instances that make sense to each other, then probably you should consider that asymmetry more than if you just see an asymmetry in one variable that is pretty high and in the other variables that are related to that you don't see it, then probably you can ignore it a bit. But yeah, it is really difficult to say that. We are always happy if we perform measurements at several instances in time. So we want to see a development if an asymmetry becomes lower, because then we have a reference. And probably I should say that, so if you're working with elite athletes, what we sometimes do with some really good football clubs and football players in Germany, we try to establish a baseline measurement in the healthy state for that athlete, so that we know about the normal asymmetry. And then if there was an injury and that person is in rehabilitation, we take a look at if that difference or that asymmetry has become bigger compared to the baseline. So that's probably also a good way to deal with that issue if you're working with elite athletes. But yeah, if you have just one measurement, it is kind of tricky and needs some experience, I would say, to understand and to figure out if a asymmetry is too high or still acceptable.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen. I think it's really good that you raised the point about this sort of repeated measurement. That's also something we hear from some of our customers that have elite athletes coming back on a regular basis to really establish a baseline. And then, as we showed with the comparison feature, you can have up to 4 comparisons within a single report. So then you can really look for trends and make sure that you don't overinterpret anything from a single session. There was another question about, is it possible to use this without gait and running, for example? And of course, I want to highlight again, it's completely up to you which movements you use. So in certain situations, maybe the room size is too small for gait, running, or cutting, but then you can simply use this and collect drop jump and counter movement jump, for example, and single leg jump, where you need less space. And the analysis still works. It even works with a single movement type. So that's no problem to run it in different scenarios. And that's also why the required number of cameras varies a little bit. I'll just see if there are any other questions here that are still open. Yeah, another question about adding more types of sessions. It's similar to the one I answered first, asking for climbing or reaching high located items. As of now, that is not quite possible. I mean, you could record some additional data and write your own analysis in Visual 3D, but it wouldn't actually show up in the web report. But as I said, we're happy to have input on that. So please send us an email, contact us, and let us know what you would like to add. I'll see. I think I've got one more question here. Maybe I answered this already, but again about the EMG integration. The EMG is collected through any of our EMG integrations into our QDM software. So in the QDM software, you can collect data from Delsys, Cometa, or Noraxon directly with a sort of native plugin. So it's streamed directly into our software and all recorded in one file. So it is already synchronized with all the other data into a single file. You can also collect data via the analog board if you have another EMG system which has an analog output. So it is very much integrated in that sense that you actually make a single recording and have everything in one place rather than merging the data afterwards. And I hope that helps you with that question. And yeah, finally, yeah, some more suggestions here. I can see we probably have some extensions for the protocol and volleyball jumps and effect of receptions on the knees. I think that is maybe something that you could simulate with the drop jump, for example, to look at the landing in the drop jump instead. Perhaps not jumping from a box. Of course, the module will also work if you're not jumping off from a box. Yeah, I think with that, we are reaching the end of our question time here. I would like to thank you all very much for joining us today. Yeah, stay healthy, stay safe in this difficult, stay safe in this difficult time. As you see, we are also working from home, trying to make the best out of it. And we are here for you. So if you have any questions, contact us at Qualisys and we'll be in touch with a follow-up email. Also, once again, thank you very much, Steffen. Thank you, Libor, for joining me and helping out today. Thanks
for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.